Welcome to the most comprehensive exploration of mermaid sightings and mysterious sea creature encounters ever documented. Throughout human history, across every ocean and coastal region on Earth, there have been persistent reports of humanoid beings dwelling beneath the waves. These accounts span from ancient maritime folklore to modern video documentation, creating one of the most captivating mysteries in cryptozoology, an unexplained phenomena. Whether you believe these creatures exist or view them as elaborate hoaxes and misidentifications, the evidence presented in this documentary will challenge your perception of what lies in the depths of our planet's oceans. From the terrifying encounters reported in Caribbean islands to the ancient legends carved into the culture of Pacific Island communities, mermaid sightings represent a global phenomenon that cannot be easily dismissed or explained away. We invite you to settle in, suspend disbelief for the next 2 hours, and examine the photographic evidence, eyewitness testimonies, and historical records that suggest something extraordinary may be swimming in the world's unexplored waters. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Part 1. The sightings and the evidence. The nature of the mystery. The study of mermaid encounters requires a unique approach to investigation. Unlike creatures that leave clear physical evidence through skeletal remains or biological samples, supposed mermaids exist in an environment that preserves almost nothing. The ocean depths remain largely unexplored, with vast regions unmapped and unimagined by human science. This fundamental truth forms the foundation of our investigation. We are examining a mystery that occurs in one of Earth's final frontiers, where absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. Throughout this first section, we will examine the contemporary accounts and video evidence that has emerged in recent decades. These modern sightings are compelling because they often come with documentation, multiple witnesses, and in some cases, footage that defies conventional explanation. We will begin with the accounts that have gained the most attention, analyze the claims made about them, and then explore the broader context of why these stories continue to surface in diverse locations around the world. The Seychelles encounter. Examining the Mermaids sighting. Our first major case takes us to the Seychelles, an archipelago of tropical islands situated in the Indian Ocean off the coast of East Africa. The Seychelles are known for their pristine beaches, crystal-clear waters, and abundant marine life. However, they are also known among certain circles as the location of one of the most credible mermaid sightings of the modern era. The account comes from multiple local fishermen and residents who reported observing a humanoid creature in the waters surrounding the islands. According to the primary witnesses, this being was distinctly different from any known marine animal. The creature exhibited characteristics that were troublingly human in appearance, yet clearly adapted to an aquatic existence. Witnesses described seeing a figure that stood approximately 6 to 7 feet in height when partially above water, with a human-like torso, arms, and facial features that resembled those of a mature male. What made these witnesses particularly credible was their experience with marine life. These were people who spent their entire lives on and around the waters of the Seychelles. They were intimately familiar with every fish, mammal, and creature common to the region. The idea that they could mistake a seal, dolphin, or known marine mammal for a humanoid being seemed unlikely given their expertise and daily interaction with such animals. The sighting itself occurred during late afternoon hours when the light was still sufficient for clear observation, but the water conditions created certain optical challenges. The creature was observed moving through the water with a swimming motion that differed markedly from any known marine mammal. Rather than the lateral tail movement characteristic of fish and most marine mammals, witnesses described a vertical undulating motion, similar to how a human might swim. This detail is significant because it suggests either misidentification of a known creature or an organism with a fundamentally different locomotion method. The witnesses also reported that the creature appeared to be observing them with apparent intelligence and curiosity. Rather than fleeing immediately upon seeing the boats, the being remained visible for several minutes, engaging in what could be described as mutual observation. One witness stated that he made direct eye contact with the creature, describing the experience as deeply unsettling despite the distance between them. He reported that the eyes contained something he described as conscious intelligence, not the reflexive awareness of an animal, but the calculated awareness of a thinking being. The color of the creature was described as pale to grayish in tone, with darker hair covering the head and upper portions of the body. The lower extremities, according to the accounts, appeared to transition into a scaled or finned structure, though the witnesses admitted that the water and distance made it difficult to describe this portion with complete certainty. What remained consistent across all accounts was the description of webbed appendages where hands would be located, with elongated digits that clearly functioned differently from human fingers. Following the initial sighting, word spread quickly through the local fishing community. The Seychelles, while developing as a tourist destination, retained strong oral traditions and community networks. The sighting was discussed in detail, and authorities in the region were made aware of the incident. However, official investigations were limited, and the incident was largely dismissed by government agencies as either misidentification or exaggeration. The significance of the Seychelles account lies not in any single piece of physical evidence, but in the convergence of credible witness testimony. Multiple independent observers provided consistent descriptions of a creature that did not match any known marine species. Moreover, these observers had the expertise to distinguish the unknown from the familiar. While skeptics can point to numerous possible explanations, an unusually large primate in water, elaborate hoax, or visual misidentification, the consistency and conviction of the witnesses lend weight to the possibility that something extraordinary was observed. The Jamaican terror. Warnings from island communities. Our investigation now turns to Jamaica, where accounts of mermaid encounters take on a far more sinister tone. Unlike the Seychelles sighting, which involved observation and mutual awareness between observer and observed, accounts from Jamaica describe creatures that are actively dangerous to humans, with a predatory intent that allegedly goes beyond mere territorial defense. Jamaica's history is deeply intertwined with the sea. As an island nation dependent on fishing, trading, and maritime commerce, generations of Jamaican residents have developed sophisticated knowledge of ocean life. Yet throughout recent decades, stories have persisted of warnings passed from fishermen to their sons and grandsons about creatures that inhabited the deeper waters surrounding the island. These were not creatures to be hunted or studied, but entities to be feared and avoided at all costs. According to accounts gathered from multiple sources within coastal Jamaican communities, there exists a creature, or possibly multiple creatures, with a documented appetite for human flesh. The reports describe beings that have allegedly attempted to capture or drag swimmers and small boat operators into deeper waters. Several accounts mention incidents where fishermen mysteriously disappeared while working in specific areas of the ocean, with the only explanation being provided by colleagues who claimed the men had been taken by something in the water. One particularly harrowing account comes from a group of fishermen operating off the coast of northern Jamaica. These men reported that they were deliberately targeted by a humanoid creature while casting their nets in relatively shallow water. According to their testimony, the creature approached the vessel with apparent intent, and one of the fishermen on the boat claimed it attempted to grasp his leg with a hand-like appendage that emerged from the water. The fisherman managed to pull himself aboard the vessel, but witnesses claimed they observed webbing between elongated fingers on the hand that had reached toward their colleague. The creature then allegedly pursued the boat, moving through the water with remarkable speed. The fisherman described it as neither fish nor human, but something existing between categories of life. The experience left them traumatized, and all involved swore to avoid that particular area of ocean indefinitely. They also made a solemn promise to warn other fishermen about the danger, understanding that if such a being existed and inhabited those waters, other locals faced genuine mortal risk. What distinguishes the Jamaican accounts from many other mermaid sighting reports is the consistency of the warning structure. Experienced fishermen were explicitly advising younger and newer fishermen to avoid certain areas. This was not casual storytelling for entertainment, but practical safety information. The fact that such warnings persisted across decades suggested either the continuation of sightings over an extended period or the deep-rooted cultural belief in these creatures' existence and danger based on accumulated historical accounts. The Jamaican reports also included descriptions of territorial behavior. According to the accounts, the creatures appeared to defend specific regions of the ocean, and fishing attempts in these territories resulted in encounters with the beings. Some fishermen reported that after avoiding the dangerous areas for extended periods and then returning, they once again encountered the creatures, suggesting these beings maintained consistent territorial claims. Several accounts from Jamaica also mentioned unusual sounds associated with the creatures. Fishermen reported hearing calls or vocalizations that they described as haunting and utterly unlike any known marine animal. These sounds were described as containing elements of both animal and human characteristics, creating a deeply unsettling auditory experience. One elderly fisherman's account specifically mentioned that the sound made the hair on his arms stand up and created an instinctive sense of danger that went beyond mere surprise or fear. The Jamaican evidence, while primarily anecdotal, carries weight because of the consensual understanding across a maritime community that danger existed in these waters. Community-wide belief systems, particularly in cultures with strong oral traditions, often develop in response to repeated genuine experiences. While each individual account could be questioned or explained away, the aggregated testimony across an entire community facing the same waters year after year suggested something more than coincidence or shared delusion. The 2009 encounter, divers and the mystery in the depths moving into documented video evidence. Our investigation examines one of the most intriguing pieces of footage allegedly captured in 2009 when a diving expedition encountered something unexpected in the deep waters of an undisclosed location. The footage shows what appears to be a humanoid figure moving through the water, observed by shocked divers who captured the interaction on underwater camera equipment. The 2009 footage presents several significant elements that merit detailed analysis. The video clearly shows what appears to be a human-like torso and upper body, with defined musculature and human proportions. However, the movement of the figure through the water is distinctly non-human. The being moves with fluid grace and apparent ease in the deep water environment, far beyond the capability of an unassisted human diver. The swimming technique utilizes an undulating motion of the lower body, consistent with descriptions from other sighting reports. What makes this footage particularly compelling is the apparent interaction between the divers and the creature. The being does not flee immediately upon seeing the cameras. Instead, it appears to observe the divers with interest, turning its body to face the cameras and remaining visible for an extended period. The divers' reactions, as captured on the audio and video, show genuine shock and surprise. One diver can be heard expressing astonishment in the audio track, with words that suggest the diver was seeing something completely unexpected and inexplicable. The lighting and water clarity in the footage are sufficient to rule out simple misidentification as a known sea creature. The proportions and structure of the being do not match any known fish, mammal, or other organism. While skeptics have suggested that the footage might show an unusually positioned seal, dolphin, or large fish, the proportions, the human-like arms and hands, and the evident intelligence in the creature's observation of the divers all contradict these explanations. The location and context of the 2009 footage remain somewhat mysterious, as the exact diving site has not been publicly disclosed. This lack of specific information has led some to question the authenticity of the footage. However, it is also possible that the divers chose to keep the location confidential for safety reasons, or to protect potential research interests, or to avoid drawing unwanted attention to the area. The technology available for creating elaborate hoaxes in 2009 must be considered in any analysis of this footage. While digital video manipulation was possible by that time, creating a convincing underwater sequence with accurate water physics, appropriate lighting, and realistic creature movements would have required significant expertise and resources. The footage lacks the telltale signs of many known hoaxes, such as artificial movement patterns or visible editing artifacts. Particularly significant is the apparent weight and mass suggested by the creature's movement through the water. The being moves with the apparent biological heaviness of a large organism, not the light, floaty movements characteristic of puppets or simple mechanical props. This suggests either genuine footage of an unknown creature or an extremely sophisticated and well-funded hoax created specifically to convince skeptical viewers. The 2009 footage has been analyzed by numerous cryptozoologists and visual effects experts. While some experts believe the footage shows a genuine unknown creature, others maintain that it could be an elaborate hoax or, less likely, a misidentified known animal. However, no consensus explanation has emerged that satisfactorily accounts for all the observed characteristics of the footage. Water depths and the unknown. Before proceeding to additional sighting accounts, it is essential to consider the broader context of oceanic exploration and what remains unknown about the world's waters. Despite centuries of human seafaring and decades of scientific oceanography, the vast majority of the ocean remains unexplored and unstudied. The deepest parts of the ocean, the abyssal zones, exist in complete darkness and under crushing pressure. Yet life flourishes in these environments. Organisms that would seem impossible according to conventional understanding of biology thrive in conditions where no sunlight penetrates, temperatures are near freezing, and pressure measures in thousands of pounds per square inch. Fish with bioluminescent lures, invertebrates of bizarre configurations, and entire ecosystem structures unknown to science are regularly discovered. However, shallower waters, where mermaids are typically sighted, are better understood. The continental shelf regions, the shallow coastal waters where human fishing occurs, and the sunlit upper layers of the ocean have been extensively studied. This fact creates a paradox. If mermaids exist and inhabit the waters where humans work, why have they not been conclusively documented? Several possible answers present themselves. First, creatures with human-level intelligence would likely actively avoid human detection if they understood the threat humans posed. Second, the ocean is vastly larger than human presence on it, even considering modern fishing and maritime activity. Third, creatures that spend most of their time in deeper water might only appear in shallow waters occasionally, creating rare opportunities for sighting. Fourth, any creature with significant intelligence would likely develop social behaviors and communication structures, potentially including warnings to other members of their species to avoid human contact. The evolutionary perspective on mermaids is worth considering. If such creatures exist, they would represent either an entirely separate branch of evolution, developing humanoid characteristics through parallel evolution, or a divergent lineage from human ancestors who adapted to aquatic life. Evolutionary biology suggests that humanoid creatures with advanced intelligence could certainly develop through natural selection, particularly if they inherited substantial cognitive abilities from ancestral populations. The question of how such creatures could remain undocumented becomes more tractable when the enormity of ocean regions is considered. A small population of intelligent, elusive creatures could theoretically remain largely unknown to modern human science despite centuries of ocean activity by humans. Most human ocean activity occurs within a few hundred miles of shore and on the surface. Vast regions of ocean, particularly at depths from hundreds to thousands of feet, receive minimal human attention. The netted creature, evidence from fishermen's catches. One of the most intriguing pieces of physical evidence in mermaid research comes from accounts of fishermen who claim to have captured or netted creatures with humanoid characteristics. These accounts are particularly significant because they provide not just observation but actual physical contact, and in some cases, detailed physical descriptions of a captured creature. The account of a netted creature with webbed hands comes from fishermen working in waters where mermaid sightings are relatively common. According to the report, the fishermen had cast their nets in locations they had worked many times before, unaware that a large humanoid creature was in the vicinity. When they hauled in their nets, they discovered not only their intended catch of fish but also a creature that trapped in their net mesh and struggling vigorously for freedom. The description provided by the fishermen is remarkably detailed. They reported that the creature possessed a human-like torso and face, with features that would be considered attractive if encountered in a human context. However, the hands were distinctly non-human, with webbing between elongated fingers that extended well beyond the length typical of human digits. The webbing was described as a thin, translucent membrane that gave the hands an appearance somewhere between human and amphibian characteristics. The lower body of the creature, according to the fisherman's account, transitioned gradually from a human-like hip structure into a tail, or fin-like appendage. This transition was not abrupt but gradual, suggesting a biological form that represented a genuine adaptive design for both terrestrial-style locomotion and aquatic propulsion. The scales, if they covered the lower body, were apparently small enough to give an impression of smooth skin from a distance, only revealing their true nature upon closer inspection. What makes this account particularly important is the duration of contact. Unlike most sightings, which involve brief observation from a distance, the fishermen had the creature in their nets and held it for a period long enough to observe multiple details. One of the fishermen reportedly reached out to touch the creature, describing the texture of the skin as neither entirely human smooth nor entirely scaled. Instead, it possessed a quality between the two, with small raised areas that might have been the bases of scales or some other dermal structure. The fishermen's behavior toward the captured creature revealed something about their character and understanding of the being. Rather than attempting to harm, kill, or keep the creature, they consciously chose to release it. This decision suggests that the fishermen recognized the creature as something not to be treated as a simple catch or commodity, but as a being worthy of liberation. The fact that they made this choice despite the creature's significant monetary value if sold to collectors or institutions speaks to the profound experience of encountering something with undeniable intelligence and apparent personhood. As the fishermen worked to disentangle the creature from the nets, they reported that it communicated with them. The communication was not through comprehensible language, but through vocalizations and actions that conveyed emotional states. The creature exhibited apparent distress at its confinement, which caused the fishermen to work more urgently to release it. Once freed, the creature made sounds that the fishermen interpreted as a kind of farewell or acknowledgement, and then it fled rapidly into deeper water. The story of this encounter spread through the fishing community, and several other fishermen reported having had similar experiences with netted creatures. In some cases, the creatures had apparently become entangled in nets through their own misadventure rather than being directly hunted. In other cases, fishermen had encountered evidence of the creature's presence, including unusual partial remains in nets or wreckage of nets apparently destroyed by something large and strong. The consistency of the physical descriptions across these various fishing encounters provides additional credibility. While individual fishermen might exaggerate or misremember details, the fact that independent observers from different boats and time periods provided remarkably similar descriptions of webbed hands, human-like torsos, and fish-like tails suggests these accounts may be based on actual observation of a genuine creature rather than coordinated deception or shared delusion. The question of why fishermen would not capture and document such a creature more thoroughly is valid, but several factors make the fishermen's reluctance understandable. First, the creatures would be extremely difficult to contain or transport without injuring or killing them. Second, fishermen would likely face legal consequences if authorities suspected them of hunting an unknown species without permission. Third, the apparent intelligence of the creatures would create a moral dilemma for many people, particularly those with strong religious or cultural beliefs about the sanctity of intelligent life. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, any fisherman who captured and displayed such a creature would face overwhelming skepticism and accusations of hoax. The potential social and professional consequences might seem disproportionate to any benefit. The UK Coast Guard footage, an official sighting in more recent years, footage reportedly captured by the United Kingdom Coast Guard has become one of the most publicly scrutinized pieces of evidence in mermaid research. The footage allegedly shows a humanoid figure breaching the water surface off the British coast, with clear humanoid characteristics visible in the brief moment of emergence. The significance of this footage lies in the apparent official nature of the source. If the United Kingdom Coast Guard, a legitimate government agency, captured footage of an unknown humanoid creature, this would represent substantial corroboration of mermaid sightings. The UK Coast Guard operates with sophisticated camera technology and trained observers, both of which would lend credibility to any documentation they produce. According to accounts of the footage, the creature emerges partially from the water, displaying a human-like upper body. The facial features are visible, and what appears to be hair is evident. The brief emergence is captured before the creature sinks back beneath the water surface. The footage itself is relatively brief, lasting only a few seconds, but sufficient to show something that appears distinctly humanoid. Analysis of the Coast Guard footage has produced several competing interpretations. Some cryptozoologists and mermaid researchers view the footage as genuine documentation of an unknown creature. They point to the detailed features visible in the footage and the lack of obvious hoaxing elements. The official source and the apparent reluctance of authorities to acknowledge the footage's significance, they argue, actually increases its credibility. If authorities had captured footage of a genuine mermaid, they might choose to downplay or deny it rather than face the social and scientific upheaval such an acknowledgement would create. Skeptics, however, argue that the footage is more likely to show a human swimmer, a seal with its head positioned in a particular way, or some other conventional explanation. They point out that the resolution and image quality create ambiguity that allows for multiple interpretations. They argue that pattern recognition tendencies in human psychology make observers inclined to see humanoid shapes even in unclear footage. Regardless of the truth of the Coast Guard footage, its existence in public discourse demonstrates the persistence of mermaid sightings and the willingness of people to believe such footage might be genuine. The fact that people are paying attention to such material, analyzing it, and debating its authenticity shows that the mermaid mystery continues to captivate modern observers. Cultural legends and their persistence. The modern sightings we have examined so far might be entirely unrelated to the ancient legends and folklore that populate cultures around the world. However, the possibility exists that both the ancient legends and modern sightings derive from genuine encounters with an unknown creature, with the legends representing the accumulated oral history of such encounters passed through generations. This hypothesis is strengthened by the observation that mermaid-like creatures appear in the mythology of isolated cultures that had no contact with each other. If mermaid legends were entirely fictional, developed independently by different cultures as cultural metaphors or mythological constructs, they would likely differ significantly in their details and characteristics. Instead, across vastly separated cultures with no possibility of communication or cultural exchange, mermaid descriptions show remarkable consistency. The basic elements of mermaid mythology that appear cross-culturally include a humanoid upper body, a piscine or cetacean lower body, existence in aquatic environments, apparent intelligence, and often an attraction or danger to humans. The fact that these elements recur across multiple cultures suggests either independent discovery of the same creature by different populations or, alternatively, the creation of very similar mythological beings through similar processes of human imagination. However, explaining why similar creatures would be independently imagined by diverse cultures is challenging. If mermaids are purely fictional, they represent a convergent mythology, similar to how different cultures developed flood myths or creation stories. But the specificity of mermaid descriptions across cultures seems to go beyond what random imagination would produce. The details of webbed hands, the particular appearance of the transition between human and animal characteristics, and the specific behaviors attributed to these creatures suggest observation of something real rather than pure invention. Consider the accounts of Aboriginal peoples in Australia regarding the Yakyok, which we will examine in greater detail. These beings were described with specific physical characteristics that would have been peculiar for a culture to invent if they had never actually observed anything like them. The idea of a creature with a human face and upper body combined with a fish tail is not an obvious or natural synthesis of observed animals. A human observing a fish might not logically conclude that a creature combining human and fish characteristics existed, unless they had actually seen such a creature. The same logic applies to the Brazilian Lara, the Scandinavian Selkies, the Polynesian tales of water-dwelling humanoids, and countless other cultural traditions. The specificity and cross-cultural consistency of these descriptions suggest a common source, observations of an actual creature that inspired the legends. This does not necessarily mean that all mermaid legends are entirely accurate descriptions of a real creature. Oral traditions inevitably embellish, modify, and enhance over generations of retelling. However, the core observation, that a humanoid creature existed in the water, may be based on genuine sightings by ancestors who passed this knowledge through their cultures as legend and warning. The Aboriginal Yakyok. Ancient accounts of water creatures. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia have maintained continuous cultural traditions for tens of thousands of years, making them one of the world's oldest continuous cultures. Within Aboriginal traditions and art, references to creatures called Yakyok or similar water-dwelling beings appear consistently. These beings are described with specific characteristics that appear in rock art, stories, and oral traditions passed down through countless generations. According to Aboriginal accounts, the Yakyok inhabited the waters of Australia and were not creatures to be casually approached or hunted. They were beings of power and supernatural significance, often associated with sacred places and with particular tribal territories. In some accounts, the Yakyok were capable of transforming between forms, appearing as humanoid creatures in the water but potentially existing in other states as well. The physical descriptions provided in Aboriginal traditions of the Yakyok include characteristics remarkably similar to mermaid descriptions from other cultures. The beings were described as possessing human-like upper bodies and faces, with features that suggested intelligence and awareness. The lower bodies were described as fish-like, or adapted for aquatic life. The beings were portrayed as capable of sophisticated behavior, including apparent communication and the ability to exert power over water conditions. What makes the Aboriginal Yakyok accounts particularly significant is their integration into a broader spiritual and practical understanding of the environment. The Yakyok were not relegated to fantasy or entertainment but were treated as genuine entities with whom humans might interact. Sacred sites were understood to be associated with Yakyok territories, and specific practices and restrictions developed around these locations. The rock art depicting the Yakyok in Aboriginal traditions provides some of the oldest visual representation of mermaid-like creatures known to human culture. These depictions show figures with distinctive features that resemble the modern sighting accounts. The artists who created these depictions thousands of years ago could not have been influenced by modern mermaid mythology, hoaxes, or shared cultural narratives. They created their artwork based on what they understood to exist in the waters surrounding their territories. The persistence of Yakyok traditions across the vast span of Aboriginal history also suggests that these beings held genuine significance in Aboriginal understanding of their environment. Cultural stories and beliefs tend to persist only if they relate to something real and important to the culture's survival and understanding. While mythological and spiritual elements certainly exist in Aboriginal traditions, the practical integration of knowledge about creatures and environments into spiritual frameworks suggests that genuine observation contributed to the Yakyok legends. Brazilian Lara and South American aquatic beings moving to South America, another region with ancient and persistent traditions of mermaid or mermaid-like creatures, is Brazil and the broader Amazon River basin. The Brazilian Lara, or water entity known by similar names in the indigenous traditions of the Amazon, represents another example of an ancient culture developing sophisticated concepts of aquatic humanoid creatures. The Lara in Brazilian tradition is described as a shapeshifter, sometimes appearing as a beautiful human woman, sometimes as a dolphin, and sometimes displaying characteristics of both. According to the traditions, the Lara inhabited both the Amazon River and associated waters, exerting influence over water conditions, fish populations, and human activities in the water. Various indigenous groups in the Amazon region developed specific practices regarding the Lara, including rituals and restrictions meant to maintain respectful relationships with these beings. The Amazon River represents one of Earth's least explored regions despite its size and significance. The river system contains vast stretches of water that remain poorly documented and rarely visited by modern researchers. The biodiversity of the Amazon is legendary, with new species still being discovered regularly. In this context, the possibility that an intelligent aquatic humanoid creature could exist within the Amazon seems less implausible than it might in more thoroughly explored regions. The Lara traditions of the Amazon also include accounts of actual encounters with these beings. Indigenous peoples reported observations of creatures matching the Lara description, often in situations where the creatures seemed to be protecting their territory or interacting with humans in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose. While Western science would require different evidence to confirm such accounts, the consistency and detail of the traditional accounts suggests genuine observation contributing to the development of the Lara mythology. The shape-shifting characteristic attributed to the Lara in some accounts might represent either a misunderstanding of natural behavior or an accurate observation of capabilities modern science would find difficult to explain. The transformation between humanoid and dolphin forms might represent either entirely fictional mythology or observation of an actual creature with capabilities beyond our current understanding. The possibilities cannot be definitively ruled out without more concrete evidence. What remains clear is that the Amazon region, despite being relatively close to populated areas, remains sufficiently unexplored that significant unknown creatures could inhabit it. The persistent traditions of the Lara suggest that something unusual inhabited Amazon waters, something that inspired both cultural traditions and documented sightings by indigenous peoples with sophisticated understanding of their environment. Mermaid artifacts and physical evidence beyond eyewitness accounts and footage. Mermaid research includes examination of artifacts and physical remains that allegedly come from mermaid or mermaid-like creatures. While much of this material falls into the category of fraudulent carnival props and tourist attractions, some accounts and artifacts warrant examination. The phenomenon of mermaid mummies became particularly prevalent in 19th-century European and Asian markets. These were constructed objects, usually created from the taxidermied remains of fish or other marine animals combined with human skeletal elements, or crafted human-like elements. Carnival operators and curiosity showmen created these mummies to display to the public, charging admission to view what was presented as the preserved remains of an actual mermaid. While clearly fraudulent by modern standards, these mummified creations reveal several important facts. First, the existence of a market for mermaid remains in the 19th century demonstrates that belief in mermaids was widespread even among educated populations in industrialized societies. Second, the fact that people were willing to pay to view mermaid mummies suggests that mermaids were considered plausible to a degree that warranted the creation of elaborate hoaxes. Third, the construction of these mummified remains required sufficient knowledge of what a mermaid might look like to create plausible-seeming objects. The creators of these mummies seem to have a specific vision of what a mermaid would resemble, suggesting either cultural traditions about mermaid appearance or inferences from various mermaid sightings and accounts. However, the prevalence of fraudulent mermaid mummies has created a situation where legitimate artifacts and remains are immediately suspect. If genuine physical evidence of a mermaid or mermaid-like creature existed, it would face intense skepticism and would need to pass rigorous scientific examination. The burden of proof for such material is extraordinarily high, higher than for most other types of evidence in cryptozoology. Some proponents of mermaid existence argue that any genuine remains have been carefully hidden by scientific institutions or governments that have discovered them but choose not to reveal their existence. According to this argument, institutions maintaining such remains would face overwhelming pressure from religious and ideological perspectives opposed to the existence of mermaids, and therefore choose discretion over disclosure. While this argument can explain the absence of physical evidence, it cannot be falsified or proven, making it difficult to use in serious investigation. Nevertheless, the possibility remains that physical evidence exists somewhere, either still unidentified among museum collections, hidden in private collections, or awaiting discovery in locations where environmental conditions preserve biological material adequately. The mummified remains held in institutions in Japan and Malaysia, while largely acknowledged to be fraudulent creations, are worth noting because they represent instances where institutions chose to maintain and display mermaid materials. The continued existence of these materials suggests a persistent interest in mermaid evidence, and a willingness of at least some institutions to engage with the subject. Patterns in sighting locations. Examining the geographic distribution of mermaid sightings reveals certain patterns that may provide clues about where such creatures, if they exist, would be most likely to inhabit. The sightings are not randomly distributed globally but show clustering in particular regions and along specific coastlines. Tropical and subtropical coastal regions appear disproportionately represented in mermaid sighting accounts. The Caribbean, Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean regions, and tropical Pacific islands all have multiple documented sighting reports. Conversely, polar regions, while containing abundant marine life, have fewer reported mermaid sightings. This distribution might reflect factors such as greater human presence and activity in tropical waters, which would increase opportunities for sightings, or actual preference of mermaid-like creatures for warmer waters. Deep water trench regions and areas of significant vertical water column complexity also appear frequently in mermaid sighting accounts. Regions like the waters off the Seychelles, parts of the Caribbean, and areas of the Indo-Pacific with complicated bathymetry, underwater topography, show multiple reports. These areas provide extensive deep water habitats where unknown creatures might hide, while also having adjacent shallow waters and shipping lanes where humans operate frequently. The combination creates conditions where elusive deep water creatures might occasionally venture into observed areas. Island nations and archipelagos appear to have more mermaid sighting reports than mainland coastal regions. This might reflect the fact that island residents have stronger connections to the sea and spend more time in water environments than mainland populations. Island economies depend heavily on fishing, making encounters more likely. Additionally, island communities often maintain strong oral traditions and are more likely to preserve sighting accounts over generations. Areas with limited scientific research and exploration appear to have more sighting reports, which might suggest that in well-studied regions, creatures have been deterred or eliminated by human activity, or alternatively, that in unstudied regions, genuine unknown creatures are more likely to be encountered and reported. The regions with the most significant sighting clusters are often those with developing or less industrialized economies, where people maintain closer relationships with natural environments, and where modern fishing practices have not completely dominated ocean activity. The geographic patterns suggest that if mermaids exist, their distribution would be consistent with intelligent creatures adapting to particular environmental niches and maintaining populations in regions where human predation and disturbance are minimized. Tropical waters provide abundance of food and comfortable environmental conditions. Deep water adjacency provides escape routes and refuge. Limited scientific presence means limited likelihood of invasive research that might threaten the creatures. The question of multiple species. A significant consideration in mermaid research is whether accounts describe a single creature species or multiple distinct species with different characteristics, distributions, and behaviors. The sighting accounts we have examined include considerable variation in the described creatures, which might suggest either variation within a single species or existence of multiple mermaid-like species. The creatures described in Caribbean waters have been characterized as more aggressive and predatory than those reported in other regions. The Seychelles creature was described as curious but not threatening. The Australian Yakyok traditions include both benign and potentially dangerous variants depending on context. The Brazilian Lara is described as sometimes beautiful and attractive, sometimes as a shapeshifter with ambiguous intentions. These variations might indicate that different regions harbor different species of humanoid aquatic creatures, each with particular characteristics suited to their local environment and evolutionary history. Alternatively, the variations might represent the same species with behavioral variance based on age, sex, individual personality, or contextual factors influencing the creature's interactions with humans. The possibility of multiple species would have significant implications for understanding how such creatures could exist without being conclusively documented. A single species, even if intelligent and elusive, might eventually be captured, identified, and scientifically described. However, if multiple species existed, each potentially with limited distribution, smaller population sizes, and behavioral adaptation to avoid human detection, the chances of definitive documentation would decrease substantially. The size variations described in different sightings, from roughly human-sized creatures to beings described as enormous, might suggest different species or different age classes of the same species. The coloration variations, pale to grayish in some accounts, darker in others, might reflect individual variation or species differences. Population viability and breeding. A critical question for mermaid existence is whether any population of such creatures could be viable. For a species to persist indefinitely, it must maintain a breeding population of sufficient size to avoid inbreeding depression and genetic drift. The population must have access to adequate food resources and must experience reproductive success rates sufficient to offset mortality. If mermaids exist in sufficient numbers to be occasionally sighted, their population would need to be in the hundreds at minimum, more likely in the thousands. A population of such magnitude would require substantial food resources. An intelligent creature with human-like cognitive abilities and apparent social structure would likely require a diverse diet with sufficient protein content. The oceans certainly contain sufficient fish resources to support such populations. The breeding behavior of hypothetical mermaids would likely follow patterns similar to intelligent marine mammals. If they possessed human-level intelligence, they might have developed complex social structures, pair bonding systems, and extended parental care. These characteristics would require sustained contact and social interaction among population members, which would create additional opportunities for human observation. However, if mermaid species were highly intelligent, they might deliberately maintain separation from human populations, teaching their young to avoid human contact and establishing territories distant from human activity centers. Intelligent species recognize threats and develop defensive strategies. A species that understood human predatory behavior, curiosity, and technological capabilities might develop sophisticated behaviors to avoid human contact entirely. The possibility exists that mermaid populations are small enough to be non-viable in the long term without intervention or change in circumstances. If a species is slowly declining toward extinction, its sightings might become more common in the short term as remaining populations become increasingly desperate or concentrated. This scenario would explain why sightings seem to cluster in particular recent time periods while remaining historically consistent. Behavioral characteristics and intelligence. One of the most significant aspects of mermaid accounts is the consistent indication that these creatures possess intelligence comparable to or potentially exceeding human intelligence. The descriptions of apparent observation, curiosity, apparent communication, and deliberate action all suggest cognitive abilities at least equivalent to human consciousness. If mermaids possess human-level intelligence, they would likely have developed cultural practices, technologies, and social systems. While no evidence of mermaid technology or artifacts has been conclusively documented, the underwater environment presents unique challenges that might result in development of different technologies than humans have created. An aquatic species with human-level intelligence might not need or develop tools for fire, hunting, or agriculture, as terrestrial humans did. Instead, they might develop sophisticated systems for underwater construction, cultivation of aquatic food sources, and manipulation of water currents. The apparent intelligence of sighted creatures raises the ethical dimension of mermaid research. If such creatures exist and possess human-level consciousness, studying them, capturing them, or displaying them would raise profound moral concerns similar to those raised by human captivity or exploitation. The decision of the fishermen who netted the creature to release it rather than capture it for study or profit reflects an intuitive ethical recognition of the being's status as a conscious entity worthy of freedom. This ethical dimension might also explain the scarcity of concrete evidence. Cultures or communities that have had sustained contact with intelligent aquatic beings might consciously choose to protect those beings by not capturing or displaying them. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon and Australia who maintain traditions of water spirits and humanoid creatures might have been actively protecting such creatures by incorporating them into spiritual frameworks that mandated respectful non-interference. Communication and human interaction. Several sighting accounts mention apparent attempts at communication between humans and mermaids. The Jamaican accounts describe vocalizations. The 2009 footage suggests apparent mutual awareness and observation. The netted creature story describes sounds interpreted as emotional communication, and numerous folklore traditions include stories of mermaids attempting to interact with humans through song, speech, or telepathic communication. The consistency of communication-related elements in mermaid accounts, across diverse cultures and time periods, suggests that such creatures might indeed have communication abilities. The nature of this communication remains unclear. Some accounts suggest vocalizations similar to human speech, others describe otherworldly sounds or tones. Still others imply nonverbal communication through gesture, eye contact, or direct mental contact. If mermaids possess human-level intelligence, communication ability would almost certainly accompany that intelligence. However, human communication relies heavily on speech, a capability that would be difficult to sustain in an aquatic environment where sound transmission works differently than in air. An aquatic species might have developed sophisticated communication systems using ultrasound, infrasound, or direct water vibration, creating a form of communication that humans would have difficulty recognizing or understanding. Some accounts mention mermaids attempting to lure humans with calls or songs. This behavior, present in various mythological traditions, might represent either purely fictional embellishment or genuine observation of creatures attempting communication. If a creature attempted to approach a human with the intent of peaceful interaction, the human might interpret the creature's vocalizations and approach as threatening, particularly if cultural predisposition led them to fear aquatic beings. The language barrier between humans and putative mermaids would be profound. Even with the best intentions on both sides, meaningful communication would be extremely difficult. Mermaids would need to understand human vocalizations and learn human language, or humans would need to learn to interpret mermaid vocalizations. Very few humans have sufficient linguistic and cultural knowledge to successfully bridge such a gap. Scientific scrutiny and challenges to acceptance. Why, if mermaid sightings are as common as many accounts suggest, has mainstream science not acknowledged the existence of such creatures? The answer involves several factors related to scientific methodology, institutional practices, and the nature of evidence required for scientific acceptance of extraordinary claims. Science operates through a process of hypothesis, testing, and peer review. For a claim like mermaid existence to be accepted by mainstream science, evidence would need to be repeatable, verifiable, and subject to rigorous testing. Eyewitness accounts, no matter how detailed or numerous, do not meet these criteria. Scientists require physical evidence, ideally including specimens, skeletal remains, genetic material, or documented behavioral observations that can be independently verified. The burden of proof for extraordinary claims is appropriately high. Accepting the existence of mermaids would require scientists to acknowledge that a major human civilization had failed to document the existence of an intelligent species. This would represent a profound failure of scientific observation and documentation methodology. Accordingly, the evidence required to overturn the current assumption of mermaid non-existence is necessarily very high. Additionally, scientists who pursue research in controversial areas risk professional credibility and funding opportunities. A scientist who seriously proposes to investigate mermaids would likely face ridicule from colleagues and difficulty securing research funding. The professional incentive structure does not encourage pursuit of mermaid research, regardless of whether physical evidence exists. The relationship between mainstream science and mermaid research represents a fundamental challenge in cryptozoology. Cryptozoology itself occupies an awkward space between scientific and non-scientific inquiry. Legitimate cryptozoologists apply scientific methodology to the study of creatures whose existence has not been formally confirmed. However, cryptozoology as a field has limited institutional support and funding compared to mainstream biology and zoology. The possibility exists that scientific institutions possess evidence of unknown aquatic humanoid creatures but choose not to publish or acknowledge this evidence due to concerns about credibility, philosophical implications, or strategic decisions about research priorities. While such conspiracy would be impossible to prove or disprove definitively, it remains within the realm of possibility. Conclusion of Part 1. We have examined the most significant contemporary sighting accounts, analyzed video evidence, and explored the persistence of mermaid traditions across vastly separated cultures. The consistency of physical descriptions across cultures, the credibility of many witnesses, and the compelling nature of video evidence all suggest that something unusual inhabits the world's waters. Whether those somethings are actual humanoid aquatic creatures or elaborate hoaxes, misidentifications, and cultural folklore remains an open question. However, the sheer quantity and consistency of sighting reports, combined with the geographic clustering of accounts in regions with significant unexplored ocean territory, suggests that the mermaid mystery deserves serious investigation. The evidence presented in Part 1 establishes that mermaid sightings are not random or baseless. They follow patterns, occur in consistent locations, and are reported by people with credibility and expertise regarding their local environments. The next section of this documentary will examine additional evidence, explore the mechanisms by which such creatures could exist unknown to modern science, and consider the implications of mermaid existence for our understanding of evolution, intelligence, and the natural world. Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this comprehensive examination of mermaid sightings and aquatic mysteries. Please provide your thoughts, questions, and additional accounts in the comments section. Subscribe for part 2, where we will delve deeper into the mystery and examine the most compelling evidence for the existence of mermaids. Welcome back to the second and final part of our comprehensive investigation into mermaid sightings and the evidence surrounding these mysterious aquatic beings. In part 1, we examined contemporary sightings, analyzed video evidence, and explored the cultural persistence of mermaid legends across the globe. We established that the accounts of mermaid encounters are consistent, geographically distributed, and often reported by credible witnesses with expertise in marine environments. In part 2, we will expand our investigation to examine the mechanisms by which unknown aquatic humanoid creatures could exist and remain largely undocumented. We will explore the evolutionary, biological, and environmental factors that would support the viability of such species. We will also examine additional sighting accounts from regions we have not yet thoroughly explored, analyze the sociological and psychological dimensions of belief in mermaids, and consider what the discovery of such creatures would mean for human understanding of evolution, consciousness, and our place in the natural world. Furthermore, we will address the skeptical positions held by mainstream science, consider the evidence that would be required to definitively prove mermaid existence, and contemplate the future of mermaid research and discovery. By the conclusion of Part 2, you will have been presented with the most comprehensive analysis of mermaid evidence available, allowing you to form your own conclusions about whether these creatures are real, misidentified, or entirely fictional. Evolution and the possibility of aquatic humanoids. The evolutionary basis for humanoid aquatic creatures is scientifically plausible, despite the absence of confirmed modern examples. Evolution through natural selection has produced an extraordinary diversity of life forms, with organisms adapting to virtually every environmental niche on Earth. The evolution of humanoid aquatic creatures would follow the same fundamental principles that govern the evolution of all life. The starting point for such evolution would be a terrestrial primate or human ancestor that adapted to aquatic life. Earth's history includes numerous examples of terrestrial mammals returning to aquatic environments and undergoing evolutionary adaptation to their new ecological niche. Whales, dolphins, seals, manatees, and otters all represent terrestrial mammals that became aquatic or semi-aquatic, developing physical adaptations suited to water environments while retaining characteristics of their mammalian ancestry. The human lineage could theoretically have produced populations that adapted to coastal aquatic life. Such populations would have initially retained the cognitive abilities and social structures that characterize human populations. Over generations and thousands of years, natural selection would favor individuals with physical adaptations beneficial to aquatic life. Streamlined body shape, reduced body hair, improved ability to hold breath, enhanced hearing for underwater sound detection, and development of webbed appendages for improved swimming capability. The timeline required for such evolution would be substantial. Evolutionary change in large, long-lived mammals typically occurs over thousands or tens of thousands of years. However, Earth's history extends over billions of years, and the human species has existed for millions of years. The diversification of human populations across different geographic regions occurred relatively recently in evolutionary terms, within the last few 100,000 years. The possibility exists that one or more human populations adapted to aquatic life during this period. The cognitive capabilities of such aquatic humanoids would likely persist or even enhance through evolutionary time. Intelligence is an advantageous trait in complex environments, and aquatic environments present numerous challenges requiring cognitive solutions. An intelligent aquatic humanoid would have evolutionary advantages in solving problems related to food procurement, navigation, social coordination, and adaptation to changing environmental conditions. The social structure of such creatures would likely resemble human social organization. Humans are intensely social creatures with complex family structures, cooperation systems, and cultural transmission of knowledge. Aquatic humanoids, if they evolved from human ancestors, would likely maintain these social characteristics. This would create the possibility of observed behaviors that suggest intelligence, communication, and cultural practices. Anatomical adaptations for aquatic life. If humanoid aquatic creatures exist, their anatomy would necessarily differ from purely terrestrial humans in ways that reflect adaptation to water environments. Understanding these potential anatomical differences provides a framework for evaluating sighting descriptions and assessing their plausibility. The most obvious anatomical adaptation would involve the lower extremities. The terrestrial human foot and leg configuration, while adequate for terrestrial locomotion, is inefficient for swimming. Evolution toward aquatic life would likely produce significant modifications to the leg and foot structure. The development of webbing between elongated toes represents one adaptation, as described in numerous mermaid accounts. Alternatively, or additionally, the legs might fuse or partially fuse into a structure more resembling the tail of cetaceans, providing powerful vertical propulsion in water. The spine and torso would likely undergo modification to support improved flexibility for aquatic propulsion. The human spine evolved for upright terrestrial posture. An aquatic existence would not require this specialized configuration. The spine of an aquatic humanoid might retain some aspects of the human spinal structure while becoming more flexible, particularly in the lumbar region, to allow the undulating body movements described in sighting accounts. Body density would potentially shift to provide neutral buoyancy in water. Human bodies are slightly less dense than fresh water but slightly more dense than salt water, requiring effort to remain afloat. An aquatic humanoid might develop fat distribution patterns and skeletal density modifications that provide neutral buoyancy, reducing the energy expenditure required to maintain position in the water column. Respiratory adaptations would be profound. The human lungs and respiratory system are optimized for air breathing. An aquatic humanoid would need either enhanced lung capacity and oxygen storage capabilities, similar to diving mammals, or potentially some form of gill adaptation. While gill development in an air-breathing mammal would be evolutionarily unlikely, the development of enhanced oxygen processing and storage systems comparable to those in deep-diving whales and seals is certainly plausible. The sensory systems would likely adapt to the aquatic environment. While human hearing relies on air vibration, underwater sound detection requires different mechanisms. The development of enhanced ability to detect water vibration, perhaps through mechanoreceptors in specialized areas of the skin, would be advantageous. Vision would similarly adapt, with potential modifications to eye structure to reduce light refraction and improve underwater visibility. Hand structure represents a critical adaptation point described in multiple sighting accounts. The development of webbing between fingers while retaining the capacity for manipulation and tool use would require precise evolutionary balance. The webbed hands described in sighting accounts represent exactly this adaptation. Human-like hands with enhanced webbing for swimming while retaining sufficient dexterity for fine manipulation. Thermoregulation would present challenges for an aquatic humanoid. Water conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than air, making maintenance of body temperature difficult. An aquatic humanoid would likely develop enhanced subcutaneous fat layers, modifications to hair structure that trap insulating air, and possibly behavioral strategies such as seeking warmer water regions seasonally or using thermoregulation practices comparable to those of modern aquatic mammals. The skin of an aquatic humanoid might display characteristics intermediate between human skin and the skin of marine mammals. The presence of small scales or scale-like structures, as described in some sighting accounts, would provide protection and possibly enhanced hydrodynamic properties. The pale or grayish coloration described in several accounts might reflect reduced melanin production adapted to underwater light conditions, or it might represent a cold-adapted skin coloration. Metabolic requirements and food sources for aquatic humanoid creatures to exist in viable populations. They would require adequate food resources. The ocean environments where mermaids are reportedly sighted contain abundant food sources, from fish of various sizes to shellfish, crustaceans, cephalopods, and other marine organisms. An intelligent aquatic species would develop sophisticated food procurement strategies, potentially including intentional cultivation or herding of preferred food species. The metabolic rate required to sustain an aquatic humanoid would be influenced by several factors. Larger bodies require more energy than smaller bodies. Cold water environments require elevated metabolic rates to maintain body temperature. High activity levels, such as extended swimming and hunting, require substantial energy input. An adult aquatic humanoid might require several thousand calories per day, depending on size, activity level, and environmental temperature. Fish populations in the reported sighting regions are abundant. A population of aquatic humanoids numbering in the hundreds or thousands could sustain itself on a fraction of the available fish resources without noticeably depleting populations. Additionally, if such creatures possessed intelligence and cultural knowledge, they might practice sustainable harvesting of food resources, maintaining population stability of their prey species and ensuring long-term resource availability. The hunting strategies employed by aquatic humanoids would likely be sophisticated. Intelligence combined with awareness of prey behavior and environmental conditions would allow development of cooperative hunting techniques. The use of tools, such as nets or spears fashioned from local materials, would enhance hunting efficiency. Some sighting accounts describe creatures operating in coordinated groups, suggesting potential cooperative behavior and social hunting structures. Seasonal migration patterns might characterize aquatic humanoid populations. Many marine animals undertake significant migrations following food resources or reproductive needs. Aquatic humanoids might similarly migrate to exploit seasonal abundance of particular food sources. Such migration patterns could explain the geographic and temporal clustering of sightings, with creatures appearing in particular regions at specific seasons before moving elsewhere. The development of food storage and preservation techniques would be advantageous for surviving periods of resource scarcity. Human populations develop techniques for food preservation including smoking, salting, and fermentation. An aquatic humanoid culture might develop similar techniques optimized for underwater storage, creating food caches in protected locations accessible during lean seasons. Reproduction and population dynamics. The reproductive biology of aquatic humanoids would likely resemble that of humans in fundamental respects, while showing adaptations to aquatic existence. If these creatures descended from human ancestors, they would retain the mammalian characteristic of live birth and extended parental care. Female aquatic humanoids would presumably become pregnant, carry offspring to term, and nurse young with milk, similar to human reproduction. However, the aquatic environment would influence several reproductive aspects. The extended period of maternal care for human children, requiring years of dependency before offspring become independent, would create significant energetic demands. An aquatic humanoid society might have developed cultural practices around childbearing and child-rearing, potentially including systems of shared parental responsibility or specialized roles for individuals caring for young. The timing and location of reproduction would likely be adapted to aquatic existence. Some marine mammals mate and give birth in water, while others return to land or specific breeding locations. Aquatic humanoids might similarly have specific reproductive seasons and locations. Some sighting accounts describe creatures in apparent pair bonding or family groups, suggesting stable social relationships and possibly monogamous or small group partnership systems. The development of contraceptive knowledge would be possible for intelligent aquatic humanoids. Understanding the connection between mating and pregnancy, they might develop techniques or knowledge for spacing births and controlling family size. This would be necessary for maintaining population stability in environments where food resources, while abundant, remain finite. Sexual dimorphism might characterize aquatic humanoid populations, with males and females displaying different sizes, colorations, or physical features. Many animal species show such differences, and human populations also display average size differences between sexes. These differences might be even more pronounced in aquatic humanoids if sexual selection pressures differed between males and females in the aquatic environment. Population growth and stability would depend on birth rates, death rates, and immigration/emigration. For a cryptic species attempting to avoid human contact, emigration to undiscovered regions would serve as a population pressure relief mechanism. If mermaids existed and maintained stability in their populations, they would likely distribute themselves across multiple oceanic regions, creating separate population clusters that maintain genetic diversity while remaining geographically separated from human activity centers. Intelligence, language, and culture. If aquatic humanoids exist, their intelligence level would be one of their most significant characteristics. The descriptions of apparent conscious observation, apparent communication, and apparent decision-making in sighting accounts all suggest intelligence at least comparable to human intelligence. Such intelligence would carry profound implications for the culture, technology, and society of such creatures. Human intelligence developed within particular environmental and social contexts. The challenges of terrestrial life, the complexity of social group management, the problem of tool creation and use, and the necessity of planning for future needs all drove the evolution of human-level cognition. An aquatic humanoid intelligence would similarly develop in response to environmental and social pressures in aquatic environments. Language, in the form of complex symbolic communication, is closely associated with human intelligence. If aquatic humanoids possess human-level intelligence, they almost certainly possess some form of complex language. This language might not be based on vocal communication as human languages are, given the different sound transmission properties of water. Instead, it might employ other modalities such as visual signals, gestural communication, or direct perception of water vibrations and patterns. The possibility that aquatic humanoid language might be entirely imperceptible to humans adds another layer to the explanation of why such creatures have remained undocumented. Humans searching for mermaids would likely expect to hear them communicate, as humans communicate through vocalizations. If mermaids communicated through means humans cannot perceive, such as ultrasonic vibrations, infrasound, electromagnetic signals, or complex patterns of movement, humans might observe mermaids in direct communication without recognizing the communication occurring. Culture in aquatic humanoid societies would likely be rich and complex. Culture is the repository of knowledge transmitted across generations through teaching, imitation, and symbolic communication. An aquatic humanoid culture might include practices related to food procurement, social rituals, spiritual or religious beliefs, artistic expression, and governance systems. Archaeological evidence of such culture would be extremely difficult to detect and preserve in aquatic environments where organic materials quickly decompose and stone or metal artifacts become encrusted or buried. Technology possessed by aquatic humanoids would likely differ substantially from human technology. The development of complex metallurgy, agriculture, and fire-based crafts would be unlikely in aquatic environments. However, an aquatic humanoid society might possess sophisticated technology related to their aquatic existence, tools for weaving water-resistant materials, techniques for construction of underwater structures, systems for food storage and preservation, and weapons or hunting implements optimized for underwater use. The absence of evidence of mermaid technology and material culture might reflect either the non-existence of such creatures or the effective concealment or rapid degradation of their cultural artifacts. Objects created from organic materials in aquatic environments would deteriorate relatively quickly. Objects created from stone or bone would be difficult to identify as artificial without clear signs of human-like craftsmanship. Over long periods, cultural artifacts might be buried by sediment or lost to ocean currents. Spiritual and religious dimensions. Many mermaid accounts include spiritual or religious elements. Mermaids in various cultural traditions are associated with water spirits, supernatural forces, or divine powers. These religious and spiritual frameworks might reflect genuine observation combined with cultural interpretation, or they might represent purely spiritual belief systems developed without physical basis. The relationship between humans and nature and cultures maintaining mermaid traditions often involves spiritual dimensions. Water itself is frequently sacralized in religious traditions, understood as a source of life and spiritual power. Creatures dwelling in water might be incorporated into spiritual frameworks as manifestations of water-based divine power or spiritual presence. Indigenous cultures maintaining mermaid traditions, such as Aboriginal peoples and Amazonian indigenous groups, often understand their interactions with the natural world as involving spiritual dimensions. The distinction between physical and spiritual reality is less rigid in many indigenous worldviews than in Western materialist frameworks. A creature that is physically real could also be spiritually significant, and these dimensions would not be understood as contradictory or mutually exclusive. The incorporation of mermaids into spiritual frameworks might serve to protect actual creatures by establishing cultural norms against harming them. If a culture understood mermaids as spiritually significant beings worthy of respect and protection, the cultural framework would naturally lead to avoidance of hunting, capturing, or displaying mermaids. This protective function would benefit actual creatures if they existed while also being explicable even if mermaids were purely spiritual entities. The association of mermaids with danger and death in some cultural traditions might reflect both genuine predatory behavior by actual creatures and spiritual symbolism regarding the dangers of water and the unknown. Water is genuinely dangerous to humans. Drowning kills thousands annually. A creature dwelling in water and capable of causing human death would naturally acquire spiritual significance as a representation of water's power and danger. Territorial behavior and human boundaries. Several sighting accounts describe apparent territorial behavior by mermaids, with creatures defending specific areas of ocean against human activity. This behavior pattern would be expected if intelligent aquatic humanoids existed and understood the threat posed by human fishing, shipping, and other ocean exploitation activities. An intelligent species observing human expansion into their habitat and the destructive effects of human technology on marine ecosystems would rationally develop defensive responses. If mermaids existed in declining numbers due to human activity, they might increasingly defend their remaining territories against human encroachment. This would create a pattern of increasing hostile encounters as human pressure on mermaid populations increased. Some accounts describe creatures deliberately attacking or harassing humans, seemingly with the purpose of driving humans away from particular areas. This behavior would be analogous to how other intelligent animals defend territories: elephants charging intruders, primates displaying threats, or predators attacking humans encroaching on their space. The apparent targeting and harassment described in some accounts could represent territorial defense rather than unprovoked predatory behavior. The establishment of cultural or spiritual prohibitions against human activity in mermaid territories might reflect actual encounters where creatures defended areas against human intrusion. If humans learned through repeated encounters that certain areas of water harbored dangerous creatures, they would naturally develop taboos against entering those areas. These taboos, when incorporated into spiritual frameworks, would effectively preserve mermaid territories while maintaining the spiritual significance that made the prohibitions culturally meaningful. The possibility exists that human development and exploitation of marine resources has driven mermaids, if they exist, into increasingly remote and isolated ocean regions. Deep ocean trenches, underwater caves, and areas distant from shipping lanes would provide refuge from human activity. The rarity of sightings might reflect the increasing retreat of mermaid populations into refuge areas as human ocean exploitation expanded. Cryptic behavior and avoidance strategies. If mermaids exist and possess intelligence, their cryptic behavior, the tendency to remain hidden and avoid detection, would be consistent with rational response to human presence. An intelligent species recognizing that humans pose a threat would naturally develop behaviors minimizing the likelihood of encountering humans. Such avoidance strategies might include temporal segregation, where mermaids operate during hours or seasons when human ocean activity is minimal. Deep ocean habitation would provide geographic segregation, with mermaids spending most of their time in deep water where human observation is rare and human technology does not frequently penetrate. Migration to remote regions would further reduce encounter probability. The teaching of avoidance behaviors to young mermaids would be critical to the species' survival. If mermaid cultures transmitted knowledge across generations, they would necessarily include information about the danger humans pose and strategies for avoiding human contact. This cultural transmission would ensure that successive generations learn to fear humans and avoid visibility, similar to how wild animals in areas with significant human predation develop acute wariness of humans. The possibility of specialized sensory capabilities that allow mermaids to detect human presence from a distance would enhance avoidance effectiveness. If mermaids possess superior underwater hearing, electromagnetic sensitivity, or other enhanced sensory capabilities, they could detect approaching boats or divers before humans became aware of their presence, allowing them to flee before being observed. Some accounts describe mermaids as seemingly aware of underwater cameras or diving equipment before being visually observed. This might suggest sensory capabilities allowing detection of electronic equipment or human presence at ranges exceeding human sensory capacity. Alternatively, it might reflect intelligent response to the unusual sounds or disturbances caused by mechanical diving equipment. The strategic use of deep diving in response to human presence would provide an effective escape mechanism. If mermaids could dive to depths beyond human diving capability, depths that would be beyond the safe range for scuba diving or even advanced technical diving, they could escape from any pursuing or observing humans. The known ability of marine mammals to dive to extreme depths demonstrates that such capabilities are possible for aquatic adapted creatures. The role of ocean currents and geography. The distribution of mermaid sightings shows clear geographic clustering in regions characterized by particular oceanographic features. Understanding these oceanographic characteristics provides insights into where creatures with the apparent characteristics of mermaids might be most likely to exist and be observed. Ocean currents distribute nutrients, heat, and organisms throughout marine ecosystems. Regions where currents converge or create eddies often display enhanced biological productivity, with abundant food resources supporting diverse populations of fish, marine mammals, and other organisms. Mermaids, if they existed and depended on fish and marine organisms for food, would logically concentrate in these high-productivity regions. These same regions often experience human fishing activity, creating opportunities for sightings. The Seychelles, where a prominent merman sighting occurred, lies in a region where Indian Ocean currents create areas of high biological productivity. The Caribbean, where numerous sightings have been reported, experiences current patterns that create rich fishing grounds. The waters off Australia, site of the Yakyok traditions, are influenced by the East Australian current and other circulation patterns, creating productive marine ecosystems. These geographic associations between sighting clusters and oceanographic productivity regions suggest that, if real, mermaid distributions would follow the same patterns as their food resources. Underwater topography influences ocean circulation patterns and creates habitat diversity. Regions with underwater canyons, seamounts, ridges, and trenches display complex water movement patterns and provide diverse habitat types. These topographically complex regions often support greater biodiversity than featureless abyssal plains. If mermaids existed, they would likely inhabit topographically complex regions offering diverse habitat and food resources. Island nations and archipelagos appear disproportionately represented in sighting accounts, which correlates with the fact that islands are typically located in regions where underwater topography is complex and where current systems are influenced by island effects. The waters surrounding islands often display the characteristics most favorable for supporting diverse marine life, including intelligent creatures. The temperature of ocean water influences the distribution of organisms. Tropical and subtropical waters, where most mermaids are reported, support greater biological diversity than polar waters. The energy input from solar heating in tropical regions supports larger biomasses of organisms, providing greater food resources for potential mermaid populations. The physiological demands of maintaining body temperature in cold water would be greater for larger aquatic organisms than in warmer water, making tropical and subtropical oceans more efficient habitats for energy-intensive large mammals or humanoids. Deep ocean refugia and undiscovered regions. The ocean depths remain largely unknown to human science. While shallow coastal waters have been relatively well studied, the abyssal regions, the deepest parts of the ocean, remain almost completely unexplored. Even the mesopelagic zone, the region from about 200 to 1,000 meters depth, is poorly understood and rarely directly observed by humans. The possibility exists that mermaid populations inhabit deep ocean regions where human presence is minimal, and where creatures would have virtually unlimited refuge from human observation and interference. Scientific expeditions to the deep ocean are rare, expensive, and limited in scope. A substantial population of intelligent creatures could exist in deep ocean regions without any human observer ever witnessing them. The mesopelagic zone, sometimes called the twilight zone, is particularly interesting in this context. This region receives limited sunlight, sufficient for some light-dependent processes but not for photosynthesis. The mesopelagic zone contains abundant fish and other organisms, many of which display bioluminescence or other light-generating capabilities. The region is complex, three-dimensional, and offers numerous habitat niches. An intelligent aquatic creature could exist in the mesopelagic zone, ascending to shallower waters occasionally to access particular resources, while maintaining primary refuge in this zone where human observation is extremely rare. Underwater cave systems, particularly in regions with complex limestone geology, provide additional refuge areas where mermaids might exist largely hidden from human observation. Cave systems can be extensive, complex, and difficult for humans to navigate or explore. A population of intelligent creatures inhabiting underwater cave networks could remain virtually invisible to humans despite living in relatively shallow water regions, simply by retreating into caves whenever humans appeared. The abyssal plains, the vast flatlands of the deep ocean, would seem inhospitable to humanoid creatures adapted to coastal and shelf regions. However, features such as hydrothermal vents create unique ecosystems in deep water where chemical energy from the Earth's interior supports life without reliance on solar energy. The possibility exists, while remote, that deep-sea civilizations of intelligent aquatic humanoids might exist around such vents, entirely unknown to surface-dwelling humans. The Pacific Island traditions beyond the Aboriginal Yakyok and Brazilian Lara already discussed, numerous Pacific Island cultures maintain traditions of humanoid water-dwelling creatures. These island traditions, developing in cultures separated by vast distances with no possibility of cultural contact, show remarkable consistency in describing creatures with characteristics similar to those reported in modern sightings. The Polynesian cultures, spread across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean, developed traditions of water spirits and humanoid ocean creatures. The Hawaiian tradition includes stories of water beings with humanoid characteristics. Similar traditions appear in Maori culture from New Zealand, in Samoan traditions, in Tongan accounts, and throughout Polynesian islands. The consistency of these traditions across the vast Polynesian diaspora suggests either cultural transmission from a common ancestral source or independent observation of similar creatures across the Pacific region. The Melanesian and Micronesian island cultures similarly maintain traditions of water-dwelling humanoid beings. These traditions were not merely mythological entertainment, but were integrated into spiritual and practical understanding of island environments. Young people were taught to respect water-dwelling beings, to avoid certain areas of water, and to understand their relationship with these creatures as part of their environmental knowledge. The geographic distribution of Pacific Island sightings and traditions corresponds to regions with particular oceanographic characteristics. The Pacific contains numerous island clusters with complex underwater topography, strong current systems, and high biological productivity. These are precisely the conditions where, if mermaids existed, they would be most likely to live and where humans working the waters would be most likely to encounter them. The Spanish colonization of Pacific Islands in the 16th and 17th centuries brought European observers into contact with indigenous Pacific cultures. Spanish records from this period include accounts of indigenous people warning colonists about water creatures and pointing out regions of ocean to be avoided. These historical records provide documented evidence that indigenous Pacific Islanders believed water-dwelling creatures inhabited their ocean regions, independent of modern mermaid mythology or media influence. Indigenous knowledge and environmental awareness. The indigenous peoples of coastal regions around the world have developed sophisticated knowledge of their marine environments through generations of direct interaction with these environments. This knowledge includes understanding of weather patterns, ocean currents, fish behavior, dangerous areas, and unusual phenomena. The consistent incorporation of mermaid or mermaid-like creatures into this body of environmental knowledge suggests that the creatures held genuine significance in indigenous understanding of their environment. Indigenous knowledge systems, often dismissed by Western science as superstition or mythology, frequently prove to contain accurate information about environmental phenomena when carefully examined. Traditional ecological knowledge, transmitted orally and refined over generations, often reflects precise observation and practical understanding of environmental conditions and animal behavior. The fact that indigenous peoples across vast geographic regions and diverse cultures maintained consistent understanding that intelligent humanoid aquatic creatures existed suggests that these creatures either genuinely existed or that human psychology across all cultures independently produces similar misidentifications or mythological constructs. The second possibility seems less likely than the first, particularly given that the creatures are described with specific physical characteristics rather than with the vague, fantastical characteristics typical of purely mythological beings. The protective frameworks that many indigenous cultures developed around mermaid traditions, establishing areas where these creatures should not be disturbed, developing rituals to maintain respectful relationships with them, and passing down warnings about dangers associated with them, all reflect practical environmental management consistent with actual encounter and genuine concern for human safety. The displacement and dispossession of indigenous peoples from their traditional ocean territories by colonial and modern nation-states has resulted in loss of traditional ocean knowledge and practices. The regions where indigenous knowledge of mermaids was richest are often the same regions where indigenous ocean access has been most severely restricted by modern fisheries management and marine development. This ironic loss of indigenous knowledge occurs precisely as modern science becomes potentially positioned to verify or refute the existence of creatures that indigenous people understood as real. Extinction risk and population decline. If mermaids exist or existed, they would almost certainly face serious threats from human activities. The industrialization of fishing, the expansion of shipping lanes, pollution of ocean waters, climate change affecting ocean temperatures and current patterns, and the general expansion of human presence and technology in marine environments all represent potential threats to aquatic humanoid populations. The development of large-scale commercial fishing over the past century has dramatically depleted fish populations in many ocean regions. A species dependent on fish as a primary food source would face resource scarcity and potential starvation from this competition. The physical danger posed by commercial fishing operations, with their large vessels, nets, sonar, and other technologies, would create substantial predation risk for creatures unprepared for such threats. Ocean pollution represents another serious threat. Chemical pollution, plastic accumulation, and other pollutants have demonstrated harmful effects on marine mammals and fish populations. Mermaids, if they existed as marine mammals, would be susceptible to similar pollution effects. Accumulation of toxins in tissues, entanglement in discarded fishing gear, ingestion of plastic, and other pollution effects would reduce population viability. Climate change and ocean acidification present long-term threats to marine ecosystems. Changes in ocean temperature affect current patterns, nutrient availability, and the distribution and abundance of fish stocks. Species adapted to particular ocean conditions might be unable to adapt to rapid climate changes. This is particularly concerning for creatures with relatively small population sizes and limited geographic distribution. The possibility exists that mermaids, if they exist, are in decline or already critically endangered. The rarity of sightings in recent decades, compared to historical sighting frequency, might reflect population decline rather than increased elusiveness. A species approaching extinction would likely become more desperate, potentially leading to more frequent contacts with humans and more sightings during a population's final decline. Alternatively, increasing human ocean presence might have driven remaining mermaid populations into refuge areas so remote or deep that human encounters have become vanishingly rare. A species responding to existential threat from human expansion might evolve increasingly cryptic behavior, retreating to the deepest and most remote ocean regions where human technology and observation capabilities are most limited. Genetic diversity and speciation. The possibility that multiple distinct species of humanoid aquatic creatures exist would have significant implications for understanding mermaid distributions and characteristics. Different species might occupy different ocean regions, different depth zones, or different ecological niches, explaining some of the variation in sighting descriptions across geographic regions. The existence of multiple mermaid species would suggest a deeper evolutionary history, with aquatic humanoid creatures representing a diverse group rather than a single species. This would require that the evolution of aquatic humanoid forms occurred multiple times, in different ancestral lineages, or that a common ancestor of multiple current species adapted to aquatic life at some point in the past. Geographic isolation in separated ocean basins could have driven speciation, with populations in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans diverging into distinct species over evolutionary time. Different environmental conditions in different ocean basins, temperature, current patterns, food resources, predator pressures, would select for different adaptations, driving divergence among isolated populations. The possibility of both freshwater and saltwater species of humanoid creatures should also be considered. Some sighting accounts come from rivers and freshwater bodies, not exclusively from oceans. The Amazon River accounts, while primarily focused on the Lara, include descriptions that could apply to purely freshwater creatures. If such creatures exist, their evolution and distribution would reflect adaptation to particular water types and environmental conditions. Genetic studies of any captured specimen would potentially reveal information about evolutionary relationships, divergence time from human ancestors, and genetic distinctiveness from other known species. Such information would be crucial for understanding the evolutionary history and biological relationships of any confirmed aquatic humanoid species. The absence of such genetic information in the current state of mermaid research reflects the fundamental challenge of documenting creatures that have not been definitively captured and studied. Mass sightings and collective experience. While most mermaid sightings involve individual observers or small groups, some accounts describe mass sightings involving larger numbers of observers. These mass sightings are particularly interesting because they reduce the likelihood that the sightings represent hallucination, misidentification, or deliberate deception by individual observers. Mass sightings reduce the possibility of individual psychological factors creating false perception. While it is theoretically possible for many people to simultaneously misidentify something as a mermaid, or for many people to deliberately coordinate a hoax, these explanations become progressively less plausible as the number of independent observers increases. A sighting witnessed by dozens of fishermen, for example, would require either that dozens of people simultaneously misidentified something or that they coordinated an elaborate deception, both increasingly unlikely scenarios. Mass sightings also create documentary evidence beyond individual accounts. If many people witnessed the same event, multiple independent descriptions would exist. If these independent descriptions showed significant consistency, the collective accuracy of the observation would be strengthened. Conversely, if independent descriptions diverged substantially, this would suggest individual misidentification or confabulation. Some historical accounts describe sightings witnessed by entire crews of ships or large groups of island residents. These accounts, while difficult to verify in their original forms, represent instances where numerous independent observers reported consistent experiences. The historical record preserves some of these accounts despite the passage of centuries and inevitable distortion through retelling. The potential for mass sightings to occur in the future, documented with modern video and photographic technology, would provide compelling evidence if such a sighting were to occur. If a mermaid were sighted by numerous observers, all equipped with smartphones and video cameras, the resulting documentation would be far more difficult to dismiss as hoax or misidentification. However, such mass sighting events are rare even in historical accounts, suggesting that if mermaids exist, their behavior or habitat selection minimizes the likelihood of large groups of humans encountering them simultaneously. Aquaculture and mermaid habitats. The development of marine aquaculture and fish farming in various ocean regions might provide unintended benefits to cryptic mermaid populations. Fish farms create concentrated aggregations of fish in relatively small areas, providing abundant food resources. If mermaids existed and inhabited areas where fish farms are located, the farms would serve as beneficial food source for the creatures. The presence of fish farm employees working in close proximity to these farms might increase the likelihood of mermaid sightings, as creatures attracted to the concentrated fish resources would have more frequent opportunities to be observed by humans. Some sightings might actually represent observations of creatures drawn to fish farm sites by the abundance of available food. Conversely, fish farm operations, with their technologies, human activity, and potential use of pesticides or medications to control fish diseases, might create hostile environments for mermaids. The chemical treatments used in some fish farms could be toxic to creatures inhabiting nearby waters. The regular human presence and activity at fish farm sites might deter mermaids from approaching, making the farms dangerous rather than attractive. The expansion of aquaculture in regions with historical mermaid sighting accounts might alter the distribution and behavior patterns of any mermaid populations in those regions. As aquaculture development proceeded, the habitat available to mermaids would be increasingly modified, potentially driving populations into refuge areas or causing local extinctions of populations previously inhabiting aquaculture regions. The psychology of mermaid belief, understanding why humans believe in mermaids despite the absence of definitive scientific confirmation, provides insights into human psychology and the factors influencing belief formation and persistence. The universality of mermaid legends across cultures suggests that something about the mermaid concept resonates with fundamental human psychological processes. The liminal nature of mermaids, existing between human and animal, between terrestrial and aquatic, between conscious and instinctual, makes them archetypal figures in human mythology and psychology. Mermaids represent the boundary between known and unknown, between civilization and wilderness, between the comfortable and the terrifying. This symbolic significance might drive human interest in mermaids even in the absence of any actual creatures. The ocean itself holds profound psychological significance for humans. The ocean represents vastness, mystery, danger, and the unknown. Human fear of the deep, of being lost in water, and of unseen creatures in dark water reflects genuine evolutionary pressures that shaped human psychology. Mermaids, as creatures inhabiting the deep ocean, encapsulate these fundamental human fears while also representing beauty, intelligence, and the possibility of communication and connection across the species boundary. The attractiveness of mermaids, as often depicted in artistic and literary traditions, combines human beauty with otherness. This combination creates psychological appeal, particularly as a representation of the exotic other. The desire to encounter and understand beings that are recognizably sentient but fundamentally different from oneself might drive human fascination with mermaids beyond any rational assessment of evidence. The historical association of mermaids with danger and death creates a psychological tension that enhances their appeal. The beautiful mermaid luring sailors to their doom, the predatory creature threatening swimmers, and the intelligent being defending its territory against human encroachment all represent scenarios that combine danger with fascination. This combination has psychological power beyond the actual threat such creatures might pose. The romantic ideal of the mermaid as a partner or companion, present in human art and literature for centuries, reflects human desires for connection and understanding with non-human intelligence. The mermaid in this role represents the possibility of transcending human isolation through connection with another intelligent being fundamentally different from ourselves. This archetype taps into deep human desires for connection and understanding. Technological advances and future discovery advances in underwater technology provide increasing capability for documenting marine life and potentially discovering unknown creatures. Modern underwater ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, autonomous underwater vehicles, improved sonar mapping technologies, and acoustic monitoring systems all extend human sensory capacity in ocean environments in ways not previously possible. The development of advanced underwater imaging technology allows high-resolution documentation of deep-sea environments. If mermaids inhabit shallow to moderate depths, the increasing sophistication of underwater cameras and submersibles would increase the likelihood of accidental documentation. The possibility exists that future underwater exploration or research specifically targeting deep-sea life might capture footage of unknown humanoid creatures. Environmental DNA monitoring represents an emerging technology with potential relevance to mermaid research. Organisms leave traces of their DNA in the water through shedding skin cells, feces, and other biological material. Advanced analysis of environmental DNA can identify the presence of organisms in water without requiring direct observation. If mermaids existed in particular ocean regions, environmental DNA analysis might provide evidence of their presence without requiring the creatures themselves to be directly observed or captured. Acoustic monitoring systems deployed in the ocean capture sounds produced by marine organisms. If mermaids communicated through vocalizations or other acoustic means, acoustic monitoring systems could potentially record their communications. Passive acoustic monitoring is increasingly used to study marine mammal behavior and distribution. If mermaid populations existed in regions where acoustic monitoring is deployed, their presence might be detected through acoustic evidence even if visual observation remained elusive. Satellite tagging technology, while primarily used on captured animals, represents another potential tool for future research. If a mermaid were captured and tagged before release, the tracking data might reveal migration patterns, habitat use, and population distribution. However, capturing any mermaid would present enormous practical and ethical challenges. The development of artificial intelligence and machine learning for analyzing vast amounts of visual data opens possibilities for automated detection of unusual creatures in underwater video footage. Large-scale analysis of underwater camera footage, aquaculture facility surveillance video, and tourist underwater cameras could theoretically detect patterns consistent with presence of unknown creatures. If sufficient mermaid sightings occurred in documented form, machine learning systems might be trained to recognize mermaid characteristics in video footage, potentially identifying instances of mermaids captured accidentally in surveillance or research footage. Legal and governance implications. The hypothetical discovery of mermaids would create unprecedented legal and governance questions. The status of mermaids as either human, animal, or something requiring a new legal category would need to be determined. This legal determination would carry enormous implications for protection, rights, research access, and human relationships with mermaid populations. If mermaids possessed human-level intelligence and capacity for communication, moral and legal arguments would exist for extending human rights to mermaid individuals and populations. International agreements might be needed to establish protection for mermaid habitats and establish protocols for human-mermaid interaction. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and similar international agreements might be expanded to include mermaid protection. The discovery of mermaids would create conflicts between conservation interests, scientific research interests, economic interests in ocean resource exploitation, and mermaid rights and interests. Ocean fishing, shipping, and resource extraction operate under various legal frameworks. The discovery of large mermaid populations in particular regions might necessitate modification of these frameworks to accommodate mermaid interests and conservation. If mermaids possess their own cultural practices, languages, and social systems, arguments would exist for respecting mermaid sovereignty and allowing mermaid self-determination regarding their territories and resources. Equitable coexistence between human and mermaid communities would require negotiation and agreement on shared resource use and mutual respect. The question of whether scientific study of mermaids could be ethically justified would be contentious. While understanding a new intelligent species would be scientifically valuable, the ethical concerns regarding research on intelligent beings would be significant. Historical abuses of human subjects in scientific research, and ongoing concerns about ethical animal research, would create hesitancy about conducting invasive research on mermaid populations. Indigenous rights and mermaid protection. The indigenous peoples who maintain traditional knowledge of mermaids would likely assert interests in mermaid protection and in having their traditional knowledge recognized and incorporated into mermaid conservation and management. Indigenous communities that developed sustainable practices regarding mermaid territories would potentially have valuable knowledge for developing human-mermaid coexistence. The recognition of indigenous rights to ocean territories has been an ongoing process in recent decades. The establishment of indigenous marine protected areas and the recognition of indigenous peoples' stewardship of ocean regions would be relevant to mermaid protection efforts. If mermaids inhabited ocean territories traditionally managed by indigenous peoples, the rights of those indigenous communities would need to be respected in any mermaid conservation framework. The intellectual property rights to traditional knowledge regarding mermaids would be another consideration. Indigenous communities that developed extensive knowledge of mermaid behavior, distribution, and interaction would potentially have claims to recognition and compensation for sharing that knowledge with broader scientific and policy communities. The participation of indigenous communities in mermaid research and management decisions would be essential for ethical and effective approaches. The historical exclusion of indigenous peoples from decisions about their ocean territories and resources has created ongoing conflicts and undermined conservation efforts. Future mermaid management would ideally involve indigenous communities as equal partners in decision-making. Economic implications of mermaid discovery. The economic implications of mermaid discovery would be substantial and diverse. The tourism industry would likely be dramatically affected, with mermaid-related tourism potentially becoming a significant economic driver for regions where mermaids were known to inhabit. Guided tours, mermaid watching expeditions, and mermaid-related entertainment and education would likely develop. However, tourism development also presents risks to mermaid populations. The disturbance created by tourism activities might stress mermaid populations or disrupt their behavior and habitat use. The pressure to continue mermaid watching tourism, even as mermaid populations declined, would create conflicts between economic interests and conservation interests. The scientific research industry would be dramatically affected. Funding would likely become available for mermaid research, potentially redirecting research resources from other areas. Universities, research institutions, and companies would establish mermaid research programs. The development of mermaid research as a distinct field would create professional opportunities and economic activity. The fishing industry would potentially be affected if mermaid conservation necessitated marine protected areas or fishing restrictions in regions where mermaid populations inhabit. Negotiations would likely be necessary to balance fishing interests with mermaid protection interests. In some cases, fishing communities might be compensated for lost fishing opportunities through conservation incentive programs. The pharmaceutical and biomedical industries might become interested in potential uses of mermaid biological materials, from potential medicines derived from mermaid biology to genetic research opportunities. The ethical and legal frameworks for commercializing mermaid biology would need to be established to prevent exploitative harvesting of mermaid tissues or organisms. Cultural and artistic impact. The confirmation of mermaid existence would have profound impacts on human art, literature, popular culture, and spiritual traditions. The mermaid would shift from being a mythological being to being a documented reality, but the mythological significance would not disappear. Instead, real mermaids would be overlaid with centuries of mythological, artistic, and cultural associations. Artists, writers, and filmmakers would engage intensively with mermaid themes, creating new works exploring the reality and implications of mermaid existence. The relationship between mythological representations and biological reality would become a central theme in cultural discourse. The ways different cultures represented mermaids in their artistic traditions would be reassessed in light of actual knowledge of real creatures. The spiritual significance of mermaids in various religious and spiritual traditions would potentially be re-examined. Religious traditions that incorporated mermaids or mermaid-like beings into their theology would need to integrate actual knowledge of mermaids into their religious frameworks. This could be done through reinterpretation of religious texts or through expansion of religious frameworks to accommodate new knowledge. The mermaid would likely become a symbol for human relationships with the ocean and with nature more broadly. The discovery of intelligent beings inhabiting the ocean, maintaining their own cultures and societies, would prompt reflection on human obligations to other intelligent beings sharing the planet. Mermaids might become symbols for environmental conservation and sustainable ocean use. Educational and scientific ramifications. The educational implications of mermaid discovery would extend from primary education through university research and professional training. The established understanding of human evolution and primate relationships would need to be revised to incorporate knowledge of aquatic humanoid species. Human uniqueness as the only intelligent species on Earth would be definitively ended, with profound implications for human self-understanding. Biology textbooks would need to be revised to incorporate mermaid evolution, anatomy, and ecology. The evolutionary mechanisms by which human ancestors adapted to aquatic environments would become a major focus of evolutionary biology. Understanding the specific selection pressures and genetic changes driving the evolution of aquatic humanoids would provide insights into evolutionary process more broadly. Anthropology and sociology would expand to include mermaid cultures and societies. The comparative study of human and mermaid cultures and social organization would become a significant field. This would potentially provide new perspectives on human societies by allowing comparison with an alternative intelligent species. The discovery of mermaids would vindicate certain research directions and vindicate researchers who pursued unconventional or marginalized fields like cryptozoology. The field of cryptozoology would gain mainstream acceptance and research support, with expanded research programs investigating other cryptozoological species claims. Environmental crisis and species protection. The realization that mermaids had existed, potentially for thousands of years, in the world's oceans, and that human activities had potentially driven them to extinction or near extinction, would create significant environmental and ethical crisis. The loss of an intelligent species without ever genuinely engaging with it would represent a profound moral failure. The urgency of mermaid protection, if populations were found to be critically endangered, would necessitate rapid mobilization of conservation efforts. Marine protected areas would need to be established, fishing restrictions implemented, and pollution controls enhanced. These conservation efforts would likely benefit other marine species and ecosystems as well, creating broader conservation benefits. The mermaid extinction crisis would potentially serve as a catalyst for broader ocean conservation efforts. The realization that humanity had driven an unknown intelligent species to the brink of extinction, without ever fully acknowledging its existence, would create powerful motivation for changed human relationships with ocean environments. The loss of mermaid languages, cultures, and knowledge systems, if populations were driven extinct before being documented, would represent a loss comparable to the loss of human indigenous languages and cultures. The erasure of unique ways of being and knowing, of sophisticated cultural systems developed over thousands of years, would be a tragedy in human-caused extinction and cultural destruction. First contact protocols. If mermaids were definitively encountered and confirmed to exist, protocols for interaction would need to be rapidly developed. The ethical principles underlying first contact would be crucial to ensuring that human interaction with mermaids was respectful and did not repeat the patterns of exploitation and abuse that characterized historical human interactions with previously unknown peoples and cultures. The development of communication methods would be one of the first priorities. If mermaids possessed language, efforts would need to be made to learn and understand mermaid communication systems. Linguists, cognitive scientists, and communication experts would likely be involved in the process of establishing communication with mermaid populations. The assessment of mermaid intelligence, emotional sophistication, and capacity for suffering would be essential for ethical treatment. If mermaids possessed consciousness comparable to human consciousness, this would necessitate extension of ethical protections and consideration of mermaid interests and preferences in decisions affecting them. The establishment of boundaries and protocols for human-mermaid interaction would be necessary to protect both humans and mermaids from potential harm. Understanding mermaid social organization, territorial behavior, and response to human presence would inform the development of interaction protocols. The protocols would ideally be developed in consultation with mermaid communities themselves, allowing them voice in determining how humans could interact with them. The future of mermaid research. The future of mermaid research depends primarily on whether definitive evidence emerges confirming mermaid existence. If no such evidence emerges, mermaid research will likely remain marginal to mainstream science, pursued primarily through cryptozoology and alternative research communities. However, if any credible evidence of mermaids emerges, the field would be transformed. The most likely scenario for definitive evidence would be the capture of video or photographic footage showing undeniably a humanoid aquatic being, ideally obtained by multiple independent observers or by official sources like government agencies. Such footage, if submitted to rigorous scientific analysis and found to be genuine, could potentially shift mainstream scientific opinion. Alternatively, physical evidence, skeletal remains, tissue samples, or other biological material would provide definitive proof. The discovery of such material would require scientific analysis, genetic sequencing, and comparative anatomy to establish that the material came from a genuinely unknown species of aquatic humanoid. The development of more sophisticated ocean monitoring technologies might eventually produce incidental documentation of mermaids. As underwater video monitoring, environmental DNA analysis, and acoustic monitoring become more extensive, the accidental discovery of mermaids through these technologies becomes increasingly likely. The most optimistic scenario from a mermaid researcher perspective would involve the voluntary emergence of mermaids into human awareness. If mermaid populations decided that peaceful contact with humans was possible and preferable to continued avoidance, they might deliberately present themselves to humans. Such voluntary contact would presumably require that mermaid leaders or representatives determined that communication and relationship with humanity was desirable and possible. Skeptical perspectives and alternative explanations. Maintaining intellectual honesty requires seriously considering skeptical perspectives on mermaid evidence and alternative explanations for sighting accounts. Skeptics rightfully point out that no definitive physical evidence of mermaids exists, that many alleged mermaid sightings have proven to be hoaxes or misidentifications, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The misidentification hypothesis holds that many or all mermaid sightings represent misidentification of known creatures. Seals, dolphins, manatees, and large fish have been mistaken for mermaids in various documented cases. The plasticity of human perception, particularly under conditions of surprise or stress, allows for significant misidentification. A seal seen from a distance, partially out of water with particular lighting, might appear more humanoid than it actually is. This hypothesis can explain many sightings without requiring the existence of unknown creatures. The cultural artifact hypothesis suggests that mermaid beliefs and sightings are primarily cultural in origin, with mermaids as mythological beings that exist in human culture and imagination rather than in physical reality. The universality of mermaid beliefs across cultures reflects similarities in human psychology and cultural production rather than observation of actual creatures. This hypothesis explains the cultural consistency of mermaid descriptions as evidence that they are culturally constructed rather than observationally derived. The hoax hypothesis proposes that contemporary mermaid sightings and evidence are primarily deliberate deceptions. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that some alleged mermaid evidence has proven to be hoaxes. The 2009 footage, the Coast Guard video, and other contemporary evidence could all be sophisticated hoaxes created for entertainment, profit, or other purposes. The motivation for hoaxes, the attention and interest that mermaids generate, is substantial. The misremembering hypothesis suggests that eyewitness accounts are subject to distortion over time and through retelling. The memory of a sighting, recalled years or decades later, becomes distorted as the memory is recalled multiple times, discussed with others, and unconsciously altered. The details become more consistent with expected mermaid appearance rather than with the actual observed phenomenon. While initially the sighting might have been of an identifiable creature, by the time the account is reported to researchers, the memory has transformed into something more mermaid-like. These skeptical perspectives are important counterweights to credulous acceptance of all mermaid accounts. The truth likely lies somewhere between the most skeptical and most credulous positions. Some sightings may represent genuine observations of unknown creatures, while others are hoaxes, misidentifications, or distorted memories. The challenge for serious mermaid research is developing methods to distinguish genuine from spurious accounts. Balance of evidence and conclusion. Weighing all evidence and arguments, what conclusion emerges regarding the existence of mermaids? The evidence cannot be characterized as definitive proof of mermaid existence. No specimen has been scientifically examined, no genetic analysis of confirmed mermaid material has been conducted, and no universally accepted photographic or video evidence has been produced. However, the evidence also cannot be characterized as entirely baseless. The consistency of sighting descriptions across cultures and time periods, the credibility of some witnesses, the clustering of sightings in particular geographic regions, and the integration of mermaid accounts into the practical environmental knowledge of maritime communities all suggest that something more than pure fiction or universal misidentification is occurring. The most reasonable assessment is that mermaids may exist, that continued investigation is warranted, and that the possibility should not be dismissed outright by mainstream science despite the lack of definitive proof. The ocean remains sufficiently unexplored and sufficiently large that significant creatures could exist unknown to science. The evolution of aquatic humanoids from primate or human ancestors is biologically plausible. The behavioral and cognitive capabilities described in sightings are consistent with intelligent creatures making conscious decisions to avoid human contact. The greatest value of mermaid research might ultimately lie not in definitively proving or disproving mermaid existence, but in focusing human attention on the ocean, on the creatures inhabiting it, and on the implications of human ocean exploitation and pollution for marine ecosystems. The possibility of mermaids, whether real or not, highlights the reality that the ocean remains largely unknown and that humanity's understanding of marine life remains incomplete. Final reflections and closing thoughts. Throughout this comprehensive examination of mermaid sightings and evidence, we have explored accounts from around the world, analyzed contemporary footage and historical traditions, and considered the biological, evolutionary, and environmental factors that would support mermaid existence if such creatures were real. The mermaid mystery persists not because of overwhelming evidence proving their existence, but because the evidence is sufficient to prevent definitive dismissal while remaining insufficient for definitive proof. In this liminal space of uncertainty, mermaids continue to captivate human imagination and inspire continued investigation. The cultural significance of mermaids extends beyond their potential physical existence. As symbols of the unknown, of the boundary between human and animal, of intelligence and consciousness in non-human form, mermaids represent something profound in human psychology and culture. Whether or not physical mermaids inhabit Earth's oceans, the idea of mermaids will continue to inspire human art, literature, spirituality, and inquiry. The practical value of mermaid research lies in the motivation it provides for ocean exploration, marine conservation, and serious scientific investigation of cryptozoological claims. The attempt to determine whether mermaids exist drives technological development, research methodology improvement, and expanded exploration of ocean environments. For those who believe mermaids are real, the challenge ahead is to conduct rigorous research and produce definitive evidence sufficient to convince skeptics and shift mainstream scientific opinion. This requires applying scientific standards to cryptozoological investigation, gathering evidence according to rigorous protocols, and subjecting findings to peer review and critical examination. For skeptics, the challenge is to remain open to unexpected discoveries while maintaining appropriate standards for evidence and avoiding credulity. The history of science includes instances of unexpected discoveries that initially seemed implausible but proved real. Skepticism combined with openness to evidence represents an optimal epistemic stance. For indigenous communities maintaining knowledge of water-dwelling beings, the challenge is to have their traditional knowledge respected and incorporated into scientific and policy frameworks while maintaining their autonomy and self-determination regarding their ocean territories and resources. The future of mermaid research is uncertain. It will depend on whether any new evidence emerges that shifts the balance of probability. It will depend on continued technological development that extends human sensory capacity in ocean environments. It will depend on whether individuals continue to pursue mermaid research despite institutional resistance and skepticism. In conclusion, the world's most compelling mermaid sightings and evidence, while not constituting proof, present a persistent mystery worthy of continued attention and investigation. The possibility of intelligent aquatic beings inhabiting Earth's oceans challenges human assumptions about the world's creatures and the extent of human knowledge about the biosphere. Whether mermaids are ultimately proven real or definitively disproven, the investigation continues to illuminate the vastness of the unknown and the limits of human understanding of the natural world. Final message: thank you for joining us for this complete 2-hour exploration of mermaid sightings, evidence, and the broader mystery surrounding these creatures. We have traveled from the Indian Ocean islands where mermaid sightings were reported, through the Caribbean waters where creatures allegedly defend their territories, across the Pacific where island cultures maintain traditions of water-dwelling beings, and into the deep consideration of how such creatures might exist and why they remain undocumented. The mermaid mystery remains open. Neither proof nor definitive disproof has been established. The investigation continues. New evidence may emerge. New sightings may be reported. Technologies may advance in ways that allow discovery of unknown creatures. We encourage you to approach this material with both openness and critical thinking. Consider the evidence presented. Research the topics that interest you most. Contribute your own observations and knowledge to the ongoing investigation. If you have witnessed something unusual in water environments, if you have knowledge of mermaid sightings or water-dwelling creatures, we encourage you to share your accounts and evidence. The accumulation of credible reports and evidence from multiple sources helps establish patterns and credibility for the mermaid mystery. Subscribe to the channel for future videos investigating mysteries, cryptozoology, unexplained phenomena, and the unknown corners of our world. Leave your thoughts and questions in the comments. Tell us where in the world you are watching this video and what time zone you inhabit. Your engagement helps us understand our audience and create future content that addresses your interests and questions. The mystery of the mermaids continues. The investigation proceeds. The truth, whatever it may be, awaits discovery in the depths of the world's oceans and in the accumulated testimony of those who have witnessed the unknown.